The following recording is a program of the World War I Historical Association. This special ongoing series commemorates the centennial of the First World War.
This is Dana Lombardi for the World War I Historical Association. On October 2nd and 3rd of 2015, a collaboration symposium was held between the WW1HA and the League of World War I Aviation Historians. This series presents the seminars offered at that symposium.
All right, today we are going to talk about one exceptional individual, Capitaine Maurice Happe, and his squadron during the month of September 1915. I did not know that I would be doing this talk until Tuesday night, so it may be a little rough, and please bear with me. I'm going to start with a short paragraph from a biography of Capitaine Happe, written by one of his biographers, Albert Emile Sorel, who described him this way: his tall silhouette, all sinew and muscles, in a black artillery uniform without officers' boards or decorations, stood out against the blue of the Vosges Mountains. He wore his fatigue cap slightly askew. He walked in long strides, indifferent to what was around him, obsessed with one concern: accomplishing everything that was his duty. His two Borzoi hounds, Fly and Olga, kept pace with him. His face, framed by a black beard, trimmed square, was rather pale. His gaze softened or turned dark, depending on his mood. He was subject to mood swings. There was something of the street Arab in his personality. But when he laughed, his brilliant white teeth reminded one of wolf's teeth.
He's not laughing.
Okay. All right, so let me tell you first where we're going to go with this. I want to start by telling you about the research that I've been doing that led me to this topic. Then we're going to talk about the context in which Escadrille MF29 operated. We're going to talk about their bombing missions during the critical month of September 1915. We'll move on to the Escadrille's first crisis and Capitaine Happe's leadership. Then we're going to talk about how the squadron communicated with the outside world, the importance of practice in perfecting their craft, their use of intelligence, and finally, the spirit of experimentation that they did, both in equipment and tactics. And actually, this will be a theme in my talk tomorrow morning also. So the research that brought me here, professionally I'm a statistician, and in the last 25 years I have been looking at the bombing campaigns of the First World War. And since I'm a statistician, I have been doing statistical analyses of the effectiveness of the German bombing of England and the British bombing of Germany. Right after I retired in 2010, I learned of the existence of a number of war diaries for French escadrilles, including many bombing escadrilles, that the French government had put on the web. At that point, I knew I had to learn French so I could read those and pull the data out of them. I published this talk in 2013 as an article in the British journal Cross and Capt International. And the reason I published it and I'm talking about it now is because this war diary really gives us details of squadron life that I have never seen anywhere else. And so it's kind of a very, very focused view of what their life was. In the example from the war diary, this is about their first bombing mission. And in fact, you can see right here in the lower right, you can see the initials for each pilot. They are flying up towards the top of the page, and they're flying in a follow the leader formation. Oops, I lost the cursor, there it is. And they're flanked by two planes that don't contain bombardiers, they contain gunners to protect them. Okay, so this diary is a really cool document. I mean, it's got not only text in it, but it's got handwritten pictures. The handwriting is beautiful, and it has all sorts of fascinating, fascinating details. This particular war diary is unique. I've looked at a number of these. Some of them are typed. And one of the situations that makes this unique is that Escadrille MF29 was in an area where there was not a very fast operational tempo. For example, in September 1915, they conducted 6 bombing missions. Other war diaries, you've got at least 1 bombing mission going on practically every day. So because there's not so much to write about operationally, they would keep track of other things going on in the squadron. And from that you can glean details about their daily life. You actually get a picture of this individual commander's leadership style. And you learn some of the other things that I just highlighted for you in the outline. The communications techniques they had, their use of practice for bombing and firing machine guns, their use of intelligence, experimentation, things like that. You really get a good picture of this. For those of you who have done primary historical research, you often come to find that you really love the documents, that it's really cool, and this document is better than most. There's a sketch on this page up here, and what it is it's showing a method they devised for doing night bombing and finding a target at night. What you've got is, there's the cursor. Over here is French territory. Over here is German territory, with the front lines in the middle. And what they've done is they've set up 4 lights inside French territory that they use to guide the bombers and triangulate them on finding their destination. All this stuff is brand new. And we're talking 1915. Nobody's ever done this before. And so there's really a lot of fascinating little details in here. Okay, I need to tell you some about the conditions under which MF-15 operated. They were first established as an escadrille in early July 1915. They had 10 aircraft. The time period we're going to look at is we're focusing on September 1915, primarily because it was the time of the escadrille's first major crisis. They were an independent escadrille. They were not part of a larger bombing group. And they were based at Belfort in in the Vosges Mountains. I'll show you a map in a minute. You've got Capitaine commanding, and they're flying Maurice Farman M.F.11 two-seater pusher bombers. I'll give you more context on those in a minute. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about the strategic concept, context. What were they doing? What were they trying to accomplish? In the map, down at the bottom, where the red arrow is where Belfort is. In the Vosges Mountains. If they were any farther to the southeast, they would be in Switzerland. They're right up against German-held Alsace. Because they are flying over mountains, it's a very difficult. They have a very difficult situation in which to fly their underpowered airplanes. Strategically, they're supporting the French 7th Army. The 7th Army had moved into German-occupied Alsace. They're trying to recapture it, and they hope, at a minimum, to be close enough to the Rhine River so that they can direct artillery on it and cut off German transport routes up and down the Rhine River. So they're doing work bombing the rail network behind German lines in support of the 7th Army. That's one of their two main missions. The other main mission is they are sometimes directed by the French headquarters to conduct reprisal raids against German cities in reprisal for attacks on French cities, aerial, artillery, or otherwise. This is what the Vosges Mountains looks like. We did a tour there in 2013. Absolutely beautiful place. Think about the Swiss Alps, but not quite as high. It's a wonderful place to take a tour. It's a hell of a place to fight a battle. In the upper right, you've got Susan Hall-Bolliff, who's probably in the room someplace, and she's our social media editor. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Capitaine Happe. This is now only the third time that this image has been shown on this side of the Atlantic. He was a very innovative French bombing pioneer. He was perhaps the first person in history to use a V formation for bombing. He was also doing night bombing very early. Night bombing was something that bombing planes resorted to when they couldn't survive during the daytime because of anti-aircraft fire or enemy interceptors. He was the commander of Escadrille MF29, and later, when MF29 became part of the newly formed 4th Bombardment Group, he took over that bombardment group. Capitaine Happe incessantly trained his crews, and we're going to look at that in some more detail. He understood how vulnerable these bombers were. These were slow, underpowered pusher bombers. And he knew that if his pilots were going to survive, much less succeed in their missions, they really had to be trained continuously so that they were razor sharp. He actually set up practice bombing ranges in an area with a number of ponds so that the pilots could actually practice dropping bombs in a safe environment and get good at being able to do it with accuracy. Completely unheard of. Nobody had ever done this before. Again, there's a lot of innovation here and with other French bombing escadrilles. Maurice Happe was a very tough commander. But he took care of his people. For example, during a 13-day period in September 1915, that was covered in the War Diary, during 13 days, he recommended medals or citations 16 times to individuals in his small squadron. He took good care of the people who did a good job for him. He was also relentless in moving out people who did not do a good job, people who could not stand up to the rigors of this kind of warfare. This really struck a chord with me, because my best supervisor at CIA was exactly like this. She took good care of her people, and the ones who weren't working for her or the ones who were divisive, she found ways to get them into other jobs, doing it for other people. She was my branch chief in the early 90s, and by the time I left in 2010, she had risen to be the third highest person at CIA. Phenomenal individual. So this really struck a chord with me. When I started reading about what he was doing, I really understood what he was trying to accomplish. Maurice Happe, as I said, was promoted to be the commander of a bombardment group after being the squadron commander. But in June 1917, he was promoted again. He became the inspector of all the aviation schools. At some point after that, he left that job and returned to the infantry to command a battalion in World War I. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why he moved from this very bureaucratically exalted position to command an infantry battalion, but my guess is that it just didn't match his temperament. This man was a warrior, and being an inspector for aviation schools probably would not have suited his temperament at all. Maurice Happe re-entered aviation after the war, and he died in an air crash in 1930. So that's Capitaine Happe. The planes they were flying were Maurice Farman M.F.11 pusher bombers. These had an 80 horsepower engine. Now, I want you to consider for a minute, that's 2/3 of the horsepower of a Mini Cooper. All right. They're trying to fly with a pilot and a bombardier, a machine gun, and 224 pounds of bombs in the mountains with an airplane with 80 horsepower. They had a lot of trouble even crossing the front lines. There's a lot of cases where the plane simply could not get up high enough to safely cross the front lines simply because there was a moderate wind that kept them from getting up. 80 horsepower was simply not sufficient for these conditions. So there were a lot of times when they turned back because they were still within range of rifle fire from the ground. Being a pusher, you have a great view out the front, kind of like standing at a podium. You've got a great view out the front. It's great for bombing, but with the propeller behind you, you're absolutely defenseless against any kind of attack from the rear. You can't even fire back at somebody who's firing at you because you'll hit your own propeller. So because of all these deficiencies for this plane, Maurice Happe trained his people very diligently. This particular picture, I believe, was taken in Serbia. But it shows the plane very nicely. You can easily see what it looked like without shadows interfering and stuff like that. So I used that picture. So during the month of September 1915, They conducted 6 bombing raids. The cities that I've blocked out in red were railroad stations that they attacked at Freiburg and Donaueschingen and Lutterbach and Lorach. In the attack at Donaueschingen, this was highlighted by 2 of these MF-11s attacking a moving train with machine guns. It's just absolutely devastating. So they were doing more than bombing. They were down literally at treetop level, strafing trains. They also attacked at Rottweil, a gunpowder factory. And the green raids against Freiburg and Mulheim were reprisal raids against cities for German atrocities. These raids were up to 80 miles away from Belfort, one way, which is really an amazing thing, an amazing distance for a plane with that lack of capability. The reprisal raid at Freiburg is interesting because it was one of the few bombing raids that really, in World War I, that really accomplished something big. They hit the Aviatik aircraft factory in Freiburg. Because they damaged that factory, the Germans decided they should move the factory much farther east to Leipzig because they were in too much danger of it being continually hit. The Escadrille's first crisis occurred on the 14th of September. While they were putting bombs on one of the Farmans, a 90mm bomb, which was essentially a converted artillery shell, slipped from the rack while the fuse was being adjusted. It went off. The explosion killed 5 people, wounded 3 others, and 1 pilot survived but lost his leg. This was about the first time there had been any deaths in the squadron. I think there had been 1 other death, maybe a month earlier. And this hit them hard. This was a real big deal, having this many people taken out in an instant. The 5 people who died for France on the 14th of September 1915 were Soldat Leandi, Soldat Georges Gallier, Soldat Louis Pauly, Soldat Modeste Leclerc, Caporal Albert Due. All of them were mechanics. They also functioned as gunners on missions or as bombardiers on missions. There is a marvelous website, if you have an interest in French aviation, by Albert Denis, in which he lists for many of the escadrilles of France in World War I, in which he has very long histories with lots of photographs. It's an excellent website if you're interested in the topic. Capitaine Happe made an address to the assembled squadron on that same day. This happened in the morning. He spoke to the squadron in the afternoon. And this really gave a good picture of one side of his leadership style. So I'm going to read it to you. I'm quoting the war diary. At 1700 hours, the Capitaine assembled the escadrille in the hangar and addressed the men with these words. Escadrille MF29, I have to read these remarks to you, lest my emotion, evidence of my momentary weakness, unduly influences what I have to say. It has been 12 hours that we've mourned. It is enough. I salute, in the hangar where they fell, the 4 mechanics, Leclerc, Pauly, D, and Gallier. We will think of them always, for you remind us that in this place of danger, none of us must ever fail. But we will never speak of them, lest our words deaden the courage of those without hardened hearts. He listed 4 mechanics as dying. One of the other ones was to die a few hours later from his wounds. I salute the wounded, Sergent Longuetu, recipient of the Médaille Militaire, whose leg was amputated. His heroism of yesterday is not diminished one whit in the cold light of morning. I salute Caporal Du, decorated with the Croix de Guerre, who had both legs amputated. His hard work and his character provide an example for us all. After having saluted them so sadly, I raise my head high. Escadrille MF29, it has been 12 hours that we've mourned. It is enough. In a few days, the Croix de Guerre will be painted on the front of all our planes. You can see the Croix de Guerre painted on the front of that plane. I have given the order that the Croix de Guerre will appear on all the doors of our barracks, on all of our tractors, and on all of our trucks. He's making a statement. This medal is not going to just pilots or observers. It is going to everyone in the squadron, even if they're a truck driver. Escadrille MF29, you have been decorated with a Croix de Guerre by Lieutenant Colonel Paré in the name of the General Commandant-in-Chief. To all of you who grieve, pilots who have given me every sacrifice, gunners and bombardiers, thanks to whom the efforts of the pilots were successful, mechanics whose role appeared less dangerous, but which today's sorrow reveals to us a perilous task, drivers and others, you who help us at all times and share the same dangers, NCOs and men of the echelon of supply and of the staff of the Escadrille, who are not spared the sorrow in the many areas where you are critical to us. All of you who are going through this sorrow, we can say today that we are all equal in this pain, just as we share this honor to our squadron. Escadrille MF29, cited with the Order of the Armies, decorated with the Croix de Guerre, I salute you. One of the interesting things about this war diary is it gives you insights into how they communicated with the rest of the French Air Force, the rest of the French Army, with intelligence and so on. They had a telegraph and a telephone. I'm sure it was only one telephone. And every time someone sent a message by either means, it was recorded in the war diary, or every phone call or every telegram that came in was recorded word for word in the war diary. So you really get a picture of this is how they communicated with the outside world. Remember, they're kind of at the very far end of the Western Front, in the mountains. If they needed to convey to a family that some member of the Escadrille had been killed or was missing, the way they did it was kind of interesting. They would send a telegram to the village mayor of the town where the person was from, and they would have the village mayor notify the family. Definitely pre-internet. Since I worked as an intelligence professional, I was very much intrigued by their use of intelligence as a squadron to evaluate their own bomb raids, to learn about what happened after a bomb raid, to learn after a bomb raid what happened in it. And so it was interesting to see these. The report here that's shown in the War Diary is from the Intelligence Service of Belfort on the 2nd of September 1915, sent at 2300 hours. In the region of Mulhouse, it says they continue to work day and night on the production of asphyxiating gas in the Rossler plant at Dornach. And that refers to a bombing raid on that plant which had been conducted in August. So they're getting in information by telegram from the regular Army Intelligence Service. They also gleaned information from German and Swiss newspapers. Remember, they're right next to Switzerland. Switzerland is a conduit for information from Germany. And so they were able to get information from those newspapers. One of the things that's fascinating is that in Switzerland they speak both French and German. And it's very funny to read different accounts of the same event in German-speaking Swiss newspapers and compare them to the accounts in the French-speaking Swiss newspapers. In the German-speaking Swiss newspapers, they might say, you know, there was a bomb raid on such and such place at such and such date, and you know, 3 little old ladies were killed, and in the French one, it's well, we shut down the production of the plant for 3 days, and you know, it's just fascinating differences. And a little hard probably for an intelligence professional to figure out what the heck is really going on. They also took advantage of official German news reports, which would give them some information. Often, at least it would tell them, you know, did they really hit the town they thought they hit? There were agents behind enemy lines who were forwarding information back out of Germany, and they would rely on them to some extent if they had some first-hand knowledge of a place that the Escadrille had bombed. They interrogated German POWs, and they talked to travelers. You know, again, being close to Switzerland, they had access to people who had been traveling on business and so on in German territory. So it's kind of interesting to see what they used and how they used it. As I said, because of the weaknesses of the MF-11, they had to practice a lot of stuff, and because bombing was a brand new craft, it was the type of thing that they really needed to practice. So they spent a lot of time doing it, and I've never seen any other account, whether it's a primary source or anything else, that talks about people practicing their arts of war. So in one 13-day period in September 1915, MF29 conducted machine gun or mousqueton carbine target practice 5 times in 13 days. They used the bombing range to practice on 1 time, and they had 14 different test flights for various things, testing engines and so on. The picture of the mousqueton carbine, you can compare it to the size of the Bell infantry rifle above, and the carbine has a bayonet on it, so it sort of looks a little longer, but it's definitely a short carbine. I took that picture in a museum in France. So they are practicing over and over again to get very good at shooting and very good at bomb dropping. They experimented in tactics, trying different things, because all this was brand new. They tried night bombing as early as the 29th of July, 1915, very early for World War I. I mentioned that Maurice Happe might have been the first person to do a V formation for bombers, and this actually is the picture in the War Diary down here. Happe is in the front. You've got 2 other pilots flying behind him in a V. And you've got another one who's moving back and forth with a machine gunner rather than a bombardier to provide protection. I say that he is perhaps the first person to do this because at some point early on, the first bombardment group, which was based elsewhere, also tried a V formation for bombers. And I don't have information on when they did that first. So Maurice Happe was certainly very early and may have been the first person in history to do this. As I said, they'd set up a bombing range so they could practice bombing on a bunch of ponds with, so they could see where the bombs fell in real time. They also did it on land, and they would measure the distance from the center and keep track of the measurements of how far, of how accurate or inaccurate they were. They measured everything. I mean, really very, very advanced techniques. And they tried using different formations with bomber escorts, like the plane in the back that's going back and forth as with a machine gunner in it instead of a bombardier. They also experimented with equipment. What you're looking at here is actually two pictures, and I put that red dotted line in the middle. The top half of the picture is the view from above of landing lights on poles. And then on the bottom half, it's the view from the side, so you can see what you've got. You've essentially got lights so that as you're coming down to the airfield, you can see the airfield, for one thing. You can see where it is. You can also see if you're descending at the right angle, and it helps you tell when you're close enough to the ground that you want to flatten out. Very advanced stuff. They also tested 4 different types of bomb sights, different machine gun bullets. On the bombing range, they did a study of dud bombs. They had a lot of duds among their modified artillery shells, and so they worked on fixing, adjusting the fuses and so on so they would work more reliably. They studied the problem and they solved it. All very scientific. I showed you early on the 2 pairs of searchlights that they use for directing bombers to a certain spot in enemy territory. And they also developed in-house things like mounts for machine guns, their own purpose-designed bomb rack, and even a wagon for moving the planes around on the airfield. So you didn't have to push the damn thing so hard. Okay, I'll take your questions, please. Yes?
When did they start getting bombs instead of modified artillery shells?
Would you please stand, sir, when you express your question?
Yes, the question was, when did they start getting actual bombs instead of modified artillery shells? My recollection is that they developed the Gros and Dro bomb, which was the first purpose-built aerial bomb, first French one. I think it was late 1915 when they had those, and they used those until 1917, and then they developed an even more advanced bomb. But it took a little while, and there were also a lot of artillery shells around, especially useful were the artillery shells that were not 75 millimeter shells, because they had so many French 75 field artillery pieces. They needed a lot of those shells, and the 90 millimeter and 155 millimeter shells, there were plenty of them around and not enough artillery pieces, so they turned those into bombs. But I think it was late 1915 when they first got the Gros and Dro bomb designed and in use. Yes?
Does the diary state that they were attacked at any time by German fighter planes?
Yes, they were. And I'm trying to remember details. It was very difficult because, as I said, they were pushers. And by late 1915, they were definitely having trouble with German planes, particularly aviatique two-seaters that would have a machine gun. So yeah, it's actually been a while since I've been through the diary and worked on this, but yes, during this time they did have some problems with that. Yes.
The triangulation process for night bombing. Were these beams that they could track, did they visibly cross? Or was it just a happen?
My impression is, no, the distances were too great to actually visibly cross. My impression is that they were sending the searchlights straight up so that they could be seen from a great distance, even behind German lines. And so they would use that to triangulate. They would presumably fly down one pair of searchlights, and then when the other pair of lights lined up behind them, then they knew they were in the right place. But it was actually too great a distance for them to be having the lights horizontal instead of vertical. John?
Steve,
Please, sir.
besides the Italians, I believe, trying a night recon in 1911, I read that Alberto Armando Salmonacid, a volunteer from Argentina, had made one of the earliest night recon flights of World War I while serving with MF-35 before transferring to MF-29. Is it possible, based on that precedent, that he may have influenced Happe to try applying it to bombing?
That's Almanacid is right here on the right.
Yeah.
It's quite possible. I don't know the details of that, but it would certainly make sense. You know, if he had tried it once and came back to tell the tale, and then he'd been able to land a bomber at night, yeah, it might have affected it. So yes, in the red shirt.
Yes. All the R&D that they were doing, did the French military establishment, the aviation establishment, adapt it across the bombing groups, or were they just kind of out there?
Yes, some of it was done across groups, particularly if there were, say, various companies that might be designing bomb racks, in addition to MF29 trying to design their own. For example, the Michelin company worked on things like that. And so these things would be farmed out to various groups, including MF29, to experiment with. And as I said, some of them were also developed in-house. Yes?
So how effective overall was the bombing campaign?
The bombing campaign, and you could almost, yeah, you could say this really for all of World War I bombing, was not particularly effective. There was simply not enough planes carrying enough bombs to make a difference. And this is the same whether we're talking about all of Britain's independent force in 1918 or we're talking about MF29. The only, you know, the best exception actually is from MF29 and their bombing forcing the Leipzig aviatique factory. I'm sorry, the aviatique factory to move to Leipzig. I mean, that was actually a rare case of an important success that could be clearly attributed to aerial bombing. Yes.
Please stand.
Yeah.
Captain being in the infantry and then going into aviation, was he a pilot prior to the war? Where did he get his training? And
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know when he trained as a pilot.
But he was a pilot.
Yes, he was a pilot by mid-1915 at least, and I don't remember if he trained after the war started or before. Yes, Ron?
These aviatiques that were combating the Normans,
Please stand so
Yeah.
everyone can hear you.
the obvious two-seaters that were combating the varmints, were they coming from the factory airfield or from a squadron there? Is it right by the factory there until they were driven off?
They had, I don't know that any of them came from the factory. It's a possibility, but certainly they were coming from established German airfields that were designed for the defense of German territory.
I was thinking maybe the test pilots might have,
It's possible that test pilots were involved, but I don't have any information that they were. Yes.
Do you know what the basics of learning French aviation were at the time? Was there any basic military training?
Yes, there was basic flight training, and right from the beginning. Initially, it was they had people train at established commercial schools that were generally set up by the airplane manufacturers. And eventually, this is very early on, 1914, and then eventually they would establish, they established various schools for elementary training, advanced training. They even had a school for gunnery in the west of France. So yeah, but their very first attempts for these were based on commercial schools that had been created by the airplane manufacturers trying to grow up business. John?
I got confused at the beginning. I guess because I'm sitting back here. I thought you had like 3 railroad junctions, the gunpowder factory, that's 4, then Molsheim,
Molsheim, yes.
Which was the Bugatti factory, and Freiburg, which was the Optitech factory.
Yes.
So that's 6, or did I screw up?
Where have I got this? Why can't I find? Oh, here we go. Yeah, we have Freiburg, Rottweil. Yes, the gunpowder factory.
Okay, so that's 6 raids. Right?
Yes, 6 raids during September.
So that was it for September.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. My follow-up was what I'm trying to find was like you would sort of categorize those. You had Molsheim and Freiburg as reprisal raids.
Yes, because the French categorized them as such.
Okay, so he was ordered to hit those for reprisal, but even though they were actual strategic targets because of the 2 factors.
That's absolutely true. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of a yeah. They would make claims that they were attacking Freiburg, but they weren't necessarily attacking the center of town. They were trying to hit something useful within the city limits. Is the way it worked. It's a little odd for reprisal raids that you're going after. You're going after a strategic target, but yes.
So last my question was their air base at Belfort, was that where the airport is now? Do you know?
I believe so. Okay. Yeah, there's an aerodrome just north of Belfort, and I have not been there, but I believe it's the same one. It seems to be the only thing that's around there for an airport. You had a question.
Yes, just really quickly, whose handwriting were we looking at? Who actually wrote Woodars did such an amazing job with all that detail? Was it the adjutant, or was it somebody else?
Yes, it was some sort of staff person. And
did they ever write their name?
They never wrote their name. Yeah, it was really, yeah, I mean, the handwriting was beautiful, and it really doesn't say who did it, which is kind of a shame. So, yes.
Steve, with regard to pilot training, it may be, and this is just speculation, in the American Air Service, a fellow by the name of Mason Patrick succeeded Benjamin Fuloy in command of the American Air Service. He was not a pilot.
Yes.
He took aviation training after the war in the 1920s and again commanded the Air Service. When I was in Germany as a cavalry squadron commander, I had responsibility for 2 aviation units. two helicopter units. One an attack helicopter, the other a sort of service flight observation reconnaissance unit. And I always thought that the Army in its infinite wisdom always made sure that at some level of command that aviators were under the command of a line officer, just to prevent, the kinds of mishaps that you might.
Foolishness.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Just an observation.
Yes, yeah, in fact, that's definitely an American trait that goes back as far as the First World War. Is you're much safer having the air service commanded by a West Point graduate like Mason Patrick than you are by some sort of, yeah, some person with hair on fire who likes to fly around fast. Way in the back, please.
Yes, you mentioned a website about French air operations. Could you go into it?
Yes.
Albin Denis?
Yeah. Albin Denis, A-L-B-I-N, same word, D-I-N-I-S.
D-E-N-I-S.
I'm sorry, thank you, John. D-E-N-I-S. Okay. Dot free, F-R-E-E, dot F-R. A-L-B-I-N-D-E-N-I-S dot free dot F-R.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yes.
That was the same question I was going to ask.
Okay, all right.
I get up and my hip is going south.
No, the lady in the back, please.
Never mind.
Actually, mine's related to your intelligence portion.
Yes.
How did they come in contact with the German POWs? You said they were getting intelligence from the POWs.
Yes, they were, I don't exactly know. My impression is that they would probably be supplying information to their intelligence service to say, if you've got anybody who has information on, this, and they give them a list of bomb raids, find out about it. I have trouble picturing a very small unit like this actually going around and interviewing lots of POWs in the hopes that one of them was in Freiburg on the right day. So I think that's probably how it would have worked. So, yes.
You didn't mention it. Did they have aerial photography available for evaluation or target identification, or was this not used at that time?
It was certainly not used by this squadron at that time. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to talk about the Russians doing this at about this time, where they were photographing the results of bomb damage, and we're talking 1915. It was something that was definitely practiced later, certainly in 1918 by the British, and pretty sure the French were doing it also, but not the squadron at this time. They were still developing cameras and for use in aerial photography. But yeah, the Russians actually were real pioneers in that, and that's something I'll talk about tomorrow morning.
I just want to mention, I attended a sleep seminar back on the 23rd, and one area that people really don't understand is the tremendous effect on your health and diseases and everything else of and productivity of lack of sleep. And we know that in the Versailles Treaty there, they specifically called out turning in all the D-7s, but also all the night bombers. They mentioned that there were less than 100 of these, for those part, in operation at any time. But apparently the sleep deprivation aspect of night bombing was very significant, actually.
I have a question, Bill. How many bombers made up your particular night raid?
Generally speaking, it might be, at this time, late 1915, with this squadron, for example, it might be 4 or 6.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sotheby, for taking the time.